Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. Over the years that I have run this channel, there is one comment that consistently comes up no matter what topic I am covering, which is it possible that there could be North American civilizations in Age of Empires 2? And this is a question that I have tried to address on one other occasion with my build for the Mississippians. However, we can actually go further. And thanks to the help of a good friend and collaborator, I can actually now give you a somewhat definitive list of what North American civilizations we could add to Age of Empires 2. What can we add to North America? It's a pretty big topic, and one that I do not cover lightly. Obviously, the history of North America is very difficult to determine, but myself and my fine collaborator have given it our best shot. Special thanks to that collaborator. This video could not have been possible without him. He is the one, the only, Crabstantine. He is a fantastic fellow who has a pretty substantial knowledge about North American history and also has his own YouTube channel. Please do check him out. Links down in the description below. He talks about various video games, and I really enjoy his content. Moving on. Let's give a brief summary of who qualifies for this list. We are talking about the peoples of North America from the Caribbean to Greenland, with a semi-arbitrary cutoff at modern Mexico. The normal AoE2 time frame of 400 to 1600 AD applies. If a civ wasn't super relevant until after then, it won't be featured then. Umbrellas are being subdivided where possible. A lot of these civilizations are big stretches, so of course umbrellas will be needed. This is not predictive in any way, but it is ordered by vague likelihood. I think it's pretty vanishingly unlikely that even one of these will be added, and even if you let me choose any number of these civilizations to put in the game, I might only add, like, I don't know, 3 or 4. Notably, however, this list will not feature the Pueblo and Navajo. They are super cool. They could totally be worth considering. However, their language and culture is sacred to them, and they do not like it being depicted in other media. As such, out of respect, we will not be featuring them on this list. If you like this content and you want to support me, make sure to leave a comment. I'd love to hear your input on this. Please do subscribe and join the Discord and support me on Ko-Fi and do the YouTube stuff. And make sure you check out Crab, again, linked in the description below. And before we jump in, one more thing to touch upon. I have a tabletop role-playing game that is coming soon to Kickstarter. It's called Enclave. It is diceless, and it's extremely good. If you want to see what gives me the right to call myself a game designer, make sure to take a look at the Enclave Kickstarter, linked in the description below. Please do hit the notify me on launch if you are even the slightest bit interested. And with that, let us touch upon what I have covered thus far in terms of North America on my channel. There's really only one thing, the Mississippians. This is a build I also did with Crab back in the day, before he started up his YouTube channel. It was, I'd say, pretty good. I liked it overall, and fortunately, the Mississippians are by far and away the best contender for a North American civilization to be added to Age of Empires 2. Everything else is pretty much a pipe dream, and all of them should technically be long shots, frankly. Of note, also, the Mississippians is kind of an old build. I haven't touched it in a while, and it's very l'avant-garde, but if that's something you might be interested in, go check it out up here. With that, let us move on to the high contenders. There's no top contenders for this list, to be honest, besides the Mississippians. So let's move straight into some other considerations that, while very unlikely, could totally be argued to be added to the game. Beginning with the Taino. Who are the Taino? They are a Caribbean people, the dominant people of the Caribbean, first to meet Columbus, and went on to interact extensively and largely cooperatively with the Spanish. They had a very strong maritime society and a population that was likely in the 100,000s, but was decimated by disease. And they traded with and possibly raided the Maya and maybe even Nahua peoples of Mesoamerica. And so, as such, they actually have connection points with multiple civilizations currently in the game. In terms of their playstyle, the Taino would likely be an aggressive rushing civ with a great early game, especially on water, and maybe some European tech later in the game. One of the few North American civilizations you could actually make the argument for having, like gunpowder or something, during the AoE2 time frame. Also of note, the Taino were known to have fought, obviously, with bows and spears, some made using imported Mesoamerican copper, so they did have metal weapons. Almost everyone in Taino society was trained in combat to some degree, and raids were participated in by most of a given village, leaving like only a token force behind. Villager rush, anyone? They also made heavy use of mercenaries from neighboring tribes. You could even possibly use the same architecture set for them as for the Mississippians, though it would be a serious stretch, and they would likely have multiple unique units, as would many civilizations on this list, and maybe even some Mesoamerican regional units. That could be kind of cool. If you want to see what some of those regionals might look like, check out my Highlands of Anahuac video linked up there to see my crack at a Mesoamerican expansion. Next of our top contenders, or high contenders rather, is the Tlingit. Who were the Tlingit? They were a Pacific Northwestern people inhabiting what is now the southernmost coast of Alaska. They were deadly raiders who absolutely terrorized the region. You could compare their raiding parties to Vikings. They used, first of all, iconic wooden armor, as did many other peoples of the Pacific Northwest, but were also some of the most proficient metal workers in early North America, creating copper weapons and maybe even some iron ones during the AoE2 timeframe. That's pretty freaking cool. And they may have even ranged as far as Siberia, making contact with Asian peoples like the Nivk, who are, admittedly extremely long-shot contenders to be added to Age of Empires 2 as well. So they actually possibly form a bridge linking the entire world around its circumference. That's pretty freaking cool, and that's one of the reasons that I think they are a much higher contender than many other North American civilizations, plus the metalworking, plus the awesome armor, plus the raiding and the militarism. Anyways, they'd be an aggressive infantry and navy civilization, maybe with like some blacksmith bonuses or attack and armor bonuses, but overall a pretty limited eco. So the Tlingit are by far and away, I would say, one of the best contenders to be added just on like a pure tech level sort of scale, and they overall fit the more conventional feel of the game, which is, you know, a point in their favor. If they were actually confirmed to have made contact with any civilization currently in the game, I don't know, like the Japanese or something, they would 100% be the top of this list. But they are not. The only civilizations they could be argued to have contacted in the old world are ones that definitely aren't yet in the game and probably wouldn't be added for quite some time. But still cool. Adding them would also enable many other civilizations in the Pacific Northwest, so even if they are a stretch to connect to the current game, adding them would bring a lot of other options online, which we will be discussing later in this video. Next up, though, we move on to our mid-contenders. There's only 2 high contenders, for good reason, right? But now we go on to some of the other stuff that you could pretty comfortably make a decent argument for. Beginning with the Kalalit. Who are they? They are a Greenlandic Inuit people descended from the Thule, who we will get to later. They are notable for their extensive interactions with Norse settlers in Greenland, with whom they traded extensively. Yes, these are the Greenland colonies established by Eric the Red. They usually got along, but sometimes when the Norse and the Kalalit clashed, the Kalalit usually won. And they absorbed many Norse into their society, especially once the Greenland colonies fell. In terms of playstyle, the Kalalit would probably be like a naval economy civilization with great hit and runs, maybe even some European technology based on Norse cultural exchange. This is very speculative, but if you were going to make this argument for any civilization on this list pre-1500 AD, it would be these guys. So the Kalalit, I think, are actually very close to being a high contender because they have the second most interaction with an existing civilization of anyone in this presentation, only second to the Taino. They are also the first Thule subgroup to branch off and form their own distinct culture, way more sedentary than their ancestors, though the line between where the Thule end and the Kalalit begin is kind of arbitrary. And you could totally portray the first peoples the Norse met to have been Thule, and then maybe evolve them into the Kalalit, or just have a single Thule civilization. You have a lot of options, in summary, but I think the Kalalit are interesting and specific enough that I would personally classify them as their own specific civilization. The Kalalit were also famed fishermen. You might say, oh, that's unsurprising, but no, even among the other Inuit, they were famed fishermen. And they fought mainly with the spears and harpoons they fished with, using stealthy ambushes. That sounds like a pretty cool playstyle. And they are still the main ethnic group of Greenland today. How cool is that? Now, let's talk about another mid-contender. Wouldn't you know, it's the Thule. So who exactly were them? I said their name a lot just now. They were the ancestors of the modern Inuits, the proto-Inuits. And according to Crab, and I quote, they were the most dominant martial force in the entire history of pre-Columbian America, including the Aztecs, by the way. That's high praise. They conquered just about all of Arctic North America in just a couple centuries, wiping out hundreds of local languages and religions and replacing them with their own. That's pretty substantial. And while nomadic, they did even build some permanent settlements as well. They interacted with the Norse in Greenland, who arrived not long after they did, and the Greenland Thule would later split off as the Kalalit. Again, if you wanted, you could say, oh, we just want a single Thule civilization. Even though I think that having a couple of these different kind of Inuit factions would be quite cool, because then you could pit them against each other. In terms of playstyle, this would be the only cavalry civilization among all pre-Columbian American contenders. Well, actually, with possibly one exception in South America, but we'll get to that in another video. How is this possible?
Dog sleds.
The Thule invented them, and the dog sled was what enabled their incredible military dominance. Pretty freaking cool, right? The dog sled as the main military unit. Dog sleds could be shared by other Arctic North American civilizations like the Kalalit, but the Thule should have some serious bonuses for them. And honestly, the dog sled thing by itself is just the coolest shit. That's like why I would want this civilization in the game. Also, under the broader banner of Inuits, these guys are one of the strongest contenders for an Age of Mythology culture in all of North America. If you don't know Inuit mythology, look it up. It is amazing and very fucked. Yes, the Thule, one of my personal favorites to be added, by the way. Next, the Beothuk. Who the heck were they? Well, they are another people of the northeast of North America. They were the people of Newfoundland who encountered the Norse colony in the New World. They were the Skrælings of Vinland Saga. They were a dominant martial people who likely migrated to Newfoundland and conquered it not long before the Norse showed up. And also, I mean, they famously drove out the Norse pretty convincingly too, so that's a point in their favor. They were an interesting midpoint, culturally speaking, between the Inuit and the Algonquin. And they were probably Algonquin in origin. In terms of their playstyle, the Beothuk would probably be an aggressive kind of mid-game jack-of-all-trades. Great infantry, great archers, just go in there and kick your teeth in. You could maybe even argue to give them the dog sled. They were known to have used thatch or wooden armor like the Mississippians, which makes them a contender for the Celt as a regional unit. If you don't know what that is, make sure you check out my Mississippians build. It was kind of like a trash eagle warrior. The main downside of the Beothuk is not a ton is known about them, meaning that like the research would be challenging, the build would have to have speculative elements, but given how iconic the Vinland Saga scenario is, I would say that alone makes them a contender on the list, though I would personally put the Thule and the Kalalit higher, given that they could feature in the Vinland Saga scenario as well. This is also close to the end of where on this list we will actually have any civilization with contact with someone who is already in-game, which is, again, another point in the Beothuk's favor. Next up, the Seminoles. They were the main inhabitants of what is now Florida. Mostly came into their own during the Gunpowder Age, quickly adopting European firearms into their way of life. But even before then, they had extensive contact with both the Mississippians and the Taino, as well as kind of bumping into the Spanish towards the very tail end of the AoE2 timeframe. In particular, they adopted many Mississippian customs and seem to have modeled their society kind of after the Mississippians. The thing that that Crab gave me as an analogy was how early Europe viewed Rome and tried to model themselves after Rome, and how a lot of Near Eastern powers modeled themselves after Persia. That was kind of how the Mississippians affected their neighbors too. They also, like I said, clashed with the Spanish during De Soto's early expeditions, which is within the AoE2 timeframe. In terms of their playstyle, the Seminoles would probably be kind of a midpoint between the Mississippians and the Taino. Better navy than the former, better toughness than the latter. And maybe you could argue for a single unique gunpowder unit. Maybe. But besides that, you could also make use of Mississippian-style regionals like the Celt, as well as Taino, like Caribbean regionals, if we ended up adding any of those, or giving them like a shared unique unit of some kind of like the Winged Hussar. And because of this, you should almost certainly have the Mississippians and the Taino in-game before you even consider the Seminoles. Even though they did interact with the Spanish, the other two were way more prominent and important. And with that, we move into Longshot territory. Welcome to Longshots, friends. The rest of the video is going to have a lot of these. Beginning with the Haida. This is yet another Pacific Northwest people, neighbors and often raiding victims of the Tlingit. They inhabited the archipelago off of what is now British Columbia, especially their namesake Haida Gwaii, which is beautiful, by the way. The Haida were very important in the Pacific Northwest. They were very maritime, even like in comparison to other Pacific Northwestern people. They were very maritime, and were also very protected because they were on an isolated island. They fought the Tlingit, they fought many others as well because they were quite prolific raiders themselves. And you could argue that even though the Tlingit were more militarily dominant, the Haida were not far off and had a lot more cultural and economic impact within the region. In terms of playstyle, the Haida would have an awesome economy, awesome navy, and maybe like an emphasis on heavy spearmen, which was something they specifically did a lot of, but could maybe have a slow start to represent their isolation. The Haida would definitely share many regional elements with other Pacific Northwestern civilizations, like the Tlingit. Wooden armored soldiers, totem poles, war canoes, longhouses, potluck. All of these were shared by most Pacific Northwestern cultures to some degree, even if some of them, like potluck, are most famously associated with the Haida today. As well as longhouses. The Haida longhouses were huge and would comfortably be the size of like 2-story buildings, as well as much, much longer. You should 100% have the Tlingit in the game before adding the Haida. Not only did the Haida have like 0 chance of any sort of old world contact, and had a little less emphasis on like the metal weapons and iconic armor stuff, but I do think that they would be best to add at the same time, so that they would have a rival baked into the game, if that makes sense. Also of interest, the civilizations of the Pacific Northwest are the only known sedentary societies in history who never invented farming. Pretty cool. That would mean that they would be a strong contender for not getting farms and having something else instead. Next up, the Labradormiut. That's a new one. I bet a lot of you haven't heard of this. I didn't either until Crab told me. This is another Proto-Inuit people. I mean, maybe Proto-Inuit, it's not the most accurate way of putting it, but they're very closely related and precede the Inuit, and they live in what is now Labrador, Canada. They were the only people to resist the Thule conquests, later going on to coexist alongside them and even merge with them to some degree, kind of becoming a joint society with them. They no longer exist as a discrete ethnic group, but then again, neither do the Thule. In terms of playstyle, the Labradormiut would be an archer civilization with great hit-and-run tactics backed up by dog sleds. They would also have a great military navy focusing on kayaks, which they would regionally share with other Inuit peoples. They were known to be the greatest hunters and archers of all the Inuit and like adjoining areas. And they could maybe get some other Inuit regionals like harpooneers, whalebone houses, cool stuff like that they could share with the Kalit and the Thule and maybe even the Beothuk to some degree. I think it would be cool if they also had a defensive and maybe even diplomacy focused playstyle to represent them kind of like parrying and deflecting the attacks of the Thule. And they didn't just fight the Thule. They also resisted incursions by Algonquin peoples like the Cree, who we'll get to later, and probably also the Beothuk. As such, you would probably want to have the Beothuk in the game as well as the Thule before you even considered the Labradormiut. But yeah, Thule are way more important, no doubt about that. Next up, the Cherokee. This is one you've almost certainly heard of, but during the AoE2 timeframe, they were very different than how they would evolve to be later on during the age of colonialism. While now associated with the Great Plains, the AoE2 timeframe sees the Cherokee as an Appalachian people near the Mississippians, with whom they shared many cultural and warfare practices. They definitely get a bunch of the same regionals. They were a very zealously spiritual people, believing in the spiritual forces of red and white, war and youth versus peace and old age. Wild simplification, but still quite cool. For playstyle, they would be a resilient sort of civilization with mobile armies and really good monks. They should have a major focus on religion. And like I said, they could have many shared regionals with the Mississippians, especially the Celt, which they almost certainly use something similar to. They are also, as a point of interest, a potential originator of the medicine wheel spiritual philosophy, which could make them a decent contender for Age of Mythology. In fact, according to Crab, they make a kick-ass AOM culture, one of the best North American contenders, though admittedly their AoE2 offerings are much more limited. Even so, based on name recognition, proximity to the Mississippians, and more, he felt like they were a pretty decent contender. And by pretty decent contender, I mean wildly unlikely, but not nearly as wildly unlikely as the next section on our list, the Mega Longshots. It only gets less likely from here, friends. Let's begin with another name you may have heard of, the Haudenosaunee. This is a civilization made famous in the AoE franchise through AoE3. They are the long-lived confederacy of the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca peoples, which dominated the Great Lakes for centuries with pure military might. Formerly called the Iroquois, it is an offensive term, so we shall not use it. While most associated with the colonial era, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was very likely founded during the AoE2 timeframe via what was called the Great Law of Peace, possibly even as early as the 12th century. That's pretty decent little entrenchment within the timeframe. And in terms of playstyle, they would be fun. They'd be very aggressive, very versatile, rounded military that could shift to match the situation. And they would introduce a bevy of Great Lakes regional units, most notably some type of tomahawk warrior. They have some claim to have possibly invented the tomahawk. They were also known for their iconic rounded war clubs, which would definitely need to be referenced. And while they would become famed rifle makers and marksmen, that was distinctly post-AoE2. It should not be referenced on a build in this game. They also had a famously flexible governmental structure, shifting from republic to dictator and everywhere in between, which could be fun to reference as maybe shifting policies, kind of like the Athenian policy mechanic in Chronicles, where you could convert your military based on the needs of the situation. I think that could be really fun. But still unlikely. Not as unlikely, however, as the Wyandot. This is yet another Great Lakes people, also known as the Huron, after which a lake is named in the Great Lakes. They were the rivals of the Haudenosaunee, usually on the back foot against them, militarily speaking, but still holding their own via alliances, playing politics, and making deals with them and other neighbors. This would mean, in terms of playstyle, they would be an economic civilization, lots of diplomatic tricks, and a generally defensive, reactive playstyle, but extra bonuses in team games. And their military would be a lot more hit and run, whereas the Haudenosaunee would just smash you in the face. In terms of other notes, they would share, of course, Great Lakes regionals with the Haudenosaunee, and they could possibly feature a monk sub-theme, since some of their politicking was religious in nature. Could be a cool twist on the formula. And they were also well known for their quick and effective adoption of firearms, but once again, that's outside of our time frame. Really cool people, though. And if you brought in the Haudenosaunee, you would probably want the Wyandot as their historical rivals. Another option you would have, if you brought in some of the Great Lakes peoples, would be the Mi'kmaq. This is an Algonquin people inhabiting what is now Nova Scotia, plus adjacent regions of the east coast of America. They were said to have been excellent fishermen and remarkably pious, waging holy wars against their neighbors well before European contact. And they remain one of the most successful East Coast Algonquin peoples to this very day. In terms of playstyle, they would be a hit-and-run, archer-focused civilization with a strong monk sub-theme. They had famously beautiful, intricate double bows. They're so cool. Please look up a Mi'kmaq double bow. Maybe I'll put one on screen right now. Editing, Rob? Do it. Thank you. They would also have access to both some Great Lake regionals, plus maybe some Algonquin-specific regionals like snowshoe archers, which they would have a big specialty for. We'll get more to some other Algonquin civilizations soon enough. Know that they're all mega long shots at least. But I'd say the Mi'kmaq is the most likely contender out of all of them. They're so cool. The double bows, the holy wars. I wish I could put them higher up on this list, but they were just not as relevant during the AoE2 timeframe as the other civilizations I've already mentioned, and even then a lot of those are pretty dubious. I would say that the Beothuk should be added to the game before the Mi'kmaq could be considered at all, and preferably the Haudenosaunee as well. The Beothuk would probably have conquered past the Mi'kmaq to get to Newfoundland in the first place. Anyways, we're moving on to another name you probably know, the Apache. This is the first and only southwestern people who could possibly fit AoE2, given that we are again excluding the Pueblo and Navajo based on their own preferences. Of note, the Apache are actually more closely related to Athabascan peoples of northwestern Canada than the southwestern neighbors like the Comanche and the Navajo and similar. So they clearly migrated down at some point. There is not explicit evidence that they interacted with Mesoamerican civilizations, but it's possible, especially the Chichimeca, who are obviously not in the game, but are a contender that I mentioned in my video on how much we could add to Mesoamerica. So again, actual evidence of this is scant at best. It's mostly inferential. The Apache were known for persistence in war, favoring long-form tracking and pursuit, and because of that, I think they would be an archer civ with great tenacity and a focus on line of sight, and probably some early gameplay too. The Apache were separated into 6 distinct tribes: the Chiricahua, the Jicarilla, the Lipan, the Mescalero, the Plains, and the Western Apache. They made extensive use of dogs in work and warfare. I did also do a video on the hunting dog ages ago. Go take a look at that up there. And if that build were added to the game, the Apache would definitely get a bonus for it, which is cool and gives them some nice distinction. But as you can see from my pretty scant slide here, there isn't a whole lot of evidence for what they were doing during the AoE2 timeframe, even though we know that they were doing stuff. They were definitely fighting, though it was probably the 6 tribes jockeying for position amongst each other, as well as some of their neighbors, which, as mentioned, we are not going to be representing. That is the last of our mega long shots, and now into the wildly unlikely territory, the ultra mega long shots. If you've been groaning with frustration at this video, be prepared to facepalm through your forehead. We're going to start with the Ojibwa. This is another Great Lakes people who spoke an Algonquian language, so they're kind of a midpoint again, who ranged around the lakes and well beyond, especially into the Canadian Northwest. They were masters of wetlands, with an amphibious military and a massive focus on canoes, which they were legendarily good at making. I haven't really talked about canoes a lot in this video, but suffice to say, there would need to be a bunch of regional varieties of canoes for any sort of North American civilization. You could not give them galleys and fireships. That would just be ridiculous. Now, the Ojibwa were very migratory, ranging between different territories at different times of year without butting heads with other tribes, enabling them to coexist pretty comfortably with each other, though they did fight plenty, especially with other peoples. For playstyle, Navy. And amphibious infantry would be a really cool and fitting addition, letting infantry swim or fight, albeit weakly, if they're in the water. The Ojibwa soldiers actually trained at fighting in water, so this would be a really cool addition. And it wouldn't be the first time I've talked about something like this. You can check out my Polynesians build, linked up here, if you're interested in seeing what my take on an amphibious infantryman might look like. They would also almost certainly need mobile bases. I had an old idea for a technology called Migration Era, which would let you pack up your town center, and the Ojibwa would definitely need something like that. In terms of other notes, the Ojibwa society was based on lakes, with each lake being linked to a different duodem, which is kind of like a clan. Maybe duodem could be an Algonquin regional technology of some kind, because a very similar system was adopted by many other Algonquin peoples. They could have both Great Lakes and Algonquin regionals along these very lines, like snowshoe archers, as mentioned for the Mi'kmaq, or tomahawk warriors, as mentioned for the Haudenosaunee. So they would have a pretty decent variety of soldiers at their disposal. That said, very unlikely still. Not as unlikely, however, as the Cree. This is another one you may have heard of. The Cree were another Algonquian people with a vast territory spanning from the Great Plains of Canada to the eastern seaboard of North America. They had the largest pre-Columbian population of all civilizations on this list, besides maybe the Mississippians. Vast numbers of them. They were very diverse, split into many different tribes, and connected by kind of a chain of inter-clan alliances. This civilization would definitely be kind of like an umbrella for many smaller ones, but we're not going to get that specific. Even for me, that would be too much. In terms of playstyle, the Cree would be infantry-focused, with high-power units, great in small groups, and with a unique focus on intimidating and luring targets. They should be able to field large armies, because they had a very big population, but be incentivized to split their forces into many small groups, which I think would be really cool. The Cree would definitely need to have the Okachital warrior, wielding their iconic gun stock clubs, which is not literally from a gun, by the way, it's just kind of shaped like one, as well as the sun gaze dance as a technology. These are very iconic and were institutions that, while most well known during the colonial era, definitely existed beforehand. And also, they had spectacular war outfits. These guys would need to look incredible. I'll throw a picture of them on screen. Editing, Rob? Picture, please. Thank you. Also, the Cree would have access to Algonquin regional units. It's a shame I can't put these guys higher up. They definitely had an impact during the AoE2 timeframe, but they were so decentralized that it's a lot harder to get specific with them. And a campaign, I don't even know where you'd start with that. Next up, a civilization I bet many of you haven't heard of, the Nuu-chah-nulth. This is another Pacific Northwest civilization inhabiting what is now called Vancouver Island. They were likely the most populous of the Pacific Northwest peoples, even more so than the Tlingit and the Haida, and likely had a very intricate political system. In terms of playstyle, I was thinking large armies of trash with like a big blend of offense and defense, less naval focused than their neighbors, but better rounded. They were also known to have used like the iconic wooden armor less than other Pacific Northwesterners, but would still qualify for their like other Pacific Northwest regionals, especially totem poles. They made greater use of war axes and ranged weapons than their neighbors, so that's another point of distinction. And they were clearly important in the Pacific Northwest, but not a ton is known about the Nuu-chah-nulth. They'd be a nice addition, but only well after the Tlingit and the Haida were added, and even then, they're way lower priority. Still really cool though, and still around today. Next option, the Chinook. This is another Pacific Northwestern people ranging along the Columbia River, spanning what is now Washington State into British Columbia. They were culturally connected to other Pacific Northwestern peoples, but took their tactics inland, raiding along the river on fast canoes. They built their society on salmon, farming salmon by moving with them as they migrated up and down river, which is super cool. They would as such be like a wildly mobile naval and archer civilization with a huge focus on fishing. Could not have this civilization without fishing. And as such, that means that they have a lot of limitations. They could likely share a lot, if not all, Pacific Northwestern regionals. And like I said a little earlier, all North American civilizations should be getting a completely different dock in form of all manner of canoes. And the Chinook would have some of the best canoes out of all of them. Fishing weirs were also immensely important, especially for a civilization like this that is so focused on fish. The Chinook are kind of like the Nuu-chah-nulth, another civilization we know very little about during the AoE2 timeframe. They would be cool to add, but all the other Pacific Northwesterners I've already mentioned would be substantially higher priorities, and this civilization would mostly be there for campaign variety as well as for its very cool and unique playstyle. Still, really low priority though. And now we come to the final civilization on this list, the Lakota. Obviously, they were most famed during the colonial era and later for their adoption of the horse, but this is before horses were introduced. No horses at all. The Lakota were a Great Plains people, the only Siouan entry on this list. Again, no horses. Those didn't become adopted into Great Plains culture until well after the AoE2 timeframe. The Lakota were very disorganized during the AoE2 timeframe. They may have raided the Mississippians and possibly even contributed to the fall of some of their northern settlements, but besides that, we really don't have a lot of an idea of what they were doing. They likely would be a raiding infantry civilization, backed up by archers, incentivizing ambushes. This is reasonably well grounded by what we know about them. But they are mostly on this list due to their name recognition, as well as the fact that literally zero other Siouan peoples of the Great Plains come even close to qualifying. The Sundance almost certainly existed during the AoE2 timeframe, so that should feature on a build for them. But even then, our options are limited. And there's even some evidence for them having been diplomatic leaders in pre-colonial era, so maybe they could have some like team play incentives or building alliances. Yeah, maybe. Very speculative, though. Almost everything about this civilization would have to be wildly speculative, but the same could be said for a lot of civilizations on this list in general. And with that, we come to the end of this North American-focused video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know that a lot of these were wildly unlikely and extremely speculative, but even so, I'd love to hear what you guys think about these prospects. Would you add any North American civilizations to Age of Empires 2? How many of the ones on this list would you personally add? Were there any civilizations here you had never heard of before that you maybe feel kind of convinced by? I think especially some of like the Inuit peoples like the Thule and the Kalalit and the Beothuk. I think those are actually pretty compelling additions myself. Any regionals you think you'd suggest for some of these civilizations? And did Crab and I miss anything on this list? If you have any knowledge about North American pre-Columbian history, please let us know down in the comments. And huge thanks and huge shoutouts once again to Crabstantine. He's great to work with. Check out his channel. He knows his stuff. I hope this has been an enjoyable video for you guys. It's again been one that I've been requested many times in the past. I'm only finally getting around to it now. I hope it's been worth the wait, and I'd love to hear what you guys would like to see from me going forwards in terms of regions of the world that we could add more Age of Empires civilizations to. But until then, my name is Robbie Howell. Thanks again to Crabstantine for his fantastic collaboration on this video, and ciao for now.